to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. This is the weekend review show. So what we're going to do is just walk through the top 10 and then talk about the new wide release openers. We're going to review the weekend of November 11th through the 13th. So let's walk through the top 10 and then we'll do a deep dive on the three new openers: Arrival, Almost Christmas, and Shut In. So coming in at number one this weekend at the box office was Doctor Strange with $43 million. That was about a 50% drop from its opening weekend. It was still on about 3,900 screens with a per theater average of about $11,000. So its total gross so far is $152. I think Marvel's super happy about this. It seems to be performing well. I would be a little bit concerned about what's going to happen to it next weekend when Beast comes out. I do think that there's a similar crossover audience there. So, I think that that 50% drop might go up into the mid 50s next weekend, but who knows? Everybody loves Marvel. The reaction to the film was fantastic. Everybody loves it. I believe it had a cinema score of A. The critics, I think it's at 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. Really fantastic overall. Another home run from Marvel. They can do no wrong. Coming at number two is Trolls with about $35 million and a fantastic drop of just about 25%. That's just phenomenal. Really, really good, especially for a film that's still on over 4,000 screens. And this is only the second weekend for Trolls. It's up to about $93 million. I think that's definitely overperforming from what people had thought, especially with that really small drop this weekend. Now, is that going to drop 25% next weekend? No, I think it's going to go much higher, probably in the 40s, just because Fantastic Beasts is just going to sort of plow away the competition. But for Trolls, bottom line, Trolls doing fantastic and sort of staying up there in the number two spot. Coming at number three, new wide release is Arrival. With $24 million on only 2,300 screens. Really fantastic opening for Arrival. The industry basically said, we're thinking mid-teens, high teens at the best. The fact that it broke 20 and went up to 24 is really good. Its per theater average was great at $10,400. I'll do a little deep dive a little bit more on Arrival later in the show, but I think, the bottom line short read here is that Arrival definitely overperformed what people were thinking it was going to do. Although it was one of those movies where I think people going into it thought it was going to be something a little bit different than it was. And I have to look up the cinema score here real quick. I forgot to do that. I think people were a little bit confused by the movie. Yeah, so the cinema score for Arrival was a B, which is not good. Like, remember, cinema score is basically A+ through about B-. That's your real A to F range. So a B is kind of like a D or like a C- in reality, if you're thinking about, your high school grades and stuff. So not a good reaction from the audience, and that's gonna hurt its legs significantly. So you're looking at least a 50% drop next weekend, if not more. Just because, cinema score is not perfect, but it does capture something. It captures the fact that the people who were really excited to see the film were not overwhelmed positively by it. So that gets out in word of mouth and social media, and it just dampers the hype of the film a bit. So expect that to drop probably over 50% next week. Coming in number four was another wide release opener, Almost Christmas, with $15.1 million on about 2,400 screens. That had a per theater average of $6,400. Pretty decent. That's right around what I said it was going to be. It's one of those films where it's like, you just don't know. It has a built-in audience. It's targeted right at the African-American demo, and they came out to see it, and it sort of did what it was expected, kind of boring. And then coming at number five was Hacksaw Ridge on its second weekend with $10.6 million. Just a great drop, 30% drop. And that drop is 30%, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, it's a prestige film that is going for awards, so those just tend to have smaller drops in general. But also people loved the film. So critics loved it and audiences just adored it. And I think that I think it's going to do really well for a long time. Its cinema score was A. And I think the general reaction to that film was Mel Gibson's back. He's got his crew back. Jesus, terrible. He's doing well again, and he's making good movies, and people are excited to see it, and they're going to keep going to see it over and over again. I don't see it doing a huge drop next weekend either, because it's got that older adult market sort of zeroed in on. So I expect the drop probably to stay below 50% next weekend. So it's already at about $32 million in its second weekend. Really good stuff for Hacksaw Ridge. The Accountant in number 6 at this weekend's box office. I just don't get, this film won't go away. It's unbelievable to me. The Accountant is the Ben Affleck whatever, like spy thriller movie. It came in at $4.4 million this weekend, and another great drop, a 25% drop. I don't know what is going on with these drops this weekend. Like everything besides Boo and Doctor Strange just had normally small drops. And that's still at about a $2,000 per theater average, which is great. I mean, it's in its 5th weekend. It just won't go away. It just will not go away. It's at $77 million so far. Number 7 was our third and last wide release opener, Shut In. Came in at $3.6 million. This was just a horror movie with Naomi Watts that was financed by a group that doesn't do a ton of wide releases in the United States. So they basically just dumped this film and see what they could get out of it. It almost kind of seemed like a VOD film or a direct to DVD in the old days, or direct to video even. 2,000 screens on that one, about a $1,800 per theater average. Not terrible for what it was. I think I was thinking, it could even go down to like a sub 1,000 per theater average, which would be a total disaster. There's no reason to think that wouldn't happen, but I do think the fact Naomi Watts was the star of it really helped it a lot, because she's a wonderful actress. She's beautiful, and she's a movie star. People want to see her. So that was number 7, Shut In. Number 8 was Boo Madea Halloween, with a nice big drop of 55%. Still on, it's starting to drop theaters a lot. Still on 2,100 theaters, $1,600 per theater average. Total so far in its 4th week, $70 million. Who would have saw that coming? I mean, I wonder if I gotta look this up, but I think that's gotta be one of the better performing Tyler Perry movies ever. So he's gonna keep on getting blank checks to rent movies. And number 9 was Jack Reacher Never Go Back, $3.3 million, a nice 40% drop. And that one's really starting to get its theaters taken away. It dropped about 500 theaters this last weekend. Its per theater average was about $1,200, $1,300. Stick it in there. The last one I believe did 80 total domestic. Right now, Jack Reacher 2 is at $55 million in its 4th weekend. It will not reach that 80. Won't even really come close. I think it'll probably end up around 60 something. Not great for Jack Reacher, but I don't know. The movie itself has been deemed very poor quality by both critics and viewers. So that's what happens. If you don't make a good product these days, people aren't going to go see it. It's one thing if the critics don't like it and the audiences do, but if they both hate it, then you're in real trouble. Finally, at number 10, oh man, Inferno with $3.3 million, a 47% drop on its 3rd weekend. Now, this one's really sad. I've gone over this film about 100 times on this podcast, but this is the Ron Howard, Dan Brown, Robert Langdon film with Tom Hanks. Just a disaster, I think, really, at the end of the day. It's at $31 million total. It's its 3rd weekend. The expectation was it was going to make mid-30s, low 30s on its opening weekend. So that sort of tells you, in the movie before this, Angels and Demons, I think, did low 40s, mid 40s on its opening weekend. So a real disaster for Inferno. It dropped about 900 screens, which means it's like the movie theaters just want to get this out of here. Like, this is trash. Get it out. I feel bad for Ron Howard, and I hope he'll find a way to recover and come back and do like another Apollo 13 or some awesome movie. But for right now, he's kind of sort of on ice. So that was the top 10. The only other thing I want to mention in terms of other movies coming out and stuff, or sort of movies outside the top 10 is, and I mention this every podcast because I'm just like super hyped about this film and I want it to do well. Moonlight, which just missed the top 10 last weekend in the 11th place, is down to 13th place with $1.265 million, plus 2%. Added about 100 theaters this week. It's up to about 200. Its per theater average was $7,200. And it's not. It's definitely a limited release. It's definitely an art film. It's definitely going to try. It's definitely going to get some Oscars, I think, or at least some nominations. But I just find that it's just a fascinating movie to me. How it's grown from just a couple of cities, and they keep adding on and adding on, just because it's doing so well. And at 200 screens essentially, and a $7,000 per theater average, that's higher than Almost Christmas per theater average. So people are going to see this movie and they really, really like it. In any event, that's the top 10 with one addition there. Now let's do a little deep dive here on the new wide releases that came out. So the one that did the best this weekend was Arrival, which I think everybody sort of had guessed. Definitely overperformed. The industry was saying mid-teens. The closest guess, it actually did $24 million. Box Office Mojo was the closest who guessed 25 million. But Hollywood Reporter said teens. IndieWire said mid-teens. Entertainment Weekly, which tends to be a little bit higher than other people, said 18 million. So it definitely overperformed. I said it was going to do about $21 million with a $9,000 per theater average. It actually came in at about a $10,400 per theater average. So I think, the overall message here is, it did a lot better than people were thinking. Obviously, it didn't do $50 million or $40 million, so it wasn't a huge breakout hit. But for a very adult-oriented sci-fi intellectual movie, you couldn't have asked for a better return on this right now. I don't know how it's going to do long term though, just because the cinema score was low, and I just heard via buzz that a lot of people did not like it that much. And I think the problem there was that the movie was advertised as a sort of Contact-esque alien invasion film almost. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. It was marketed as an alien invasion film, but it was more like Contact, which was kind of like an intellectual, cerebral, philosophical film. And I think Arrival is much more like that than, say, Independence Day. But I think the marketing sort of oversold the alien invasion part of it and undersold the intellectual, cerebral aspect of the film, which is why you're probably seeing a cinema score of B, and which is also why I think the legs on this are going to start to collapse a bit. So I expect an over 50% drop next weekend, despite the fact that critics loved the film. I think the audience reaction was a little bit tepid. Almost Christmas was the second sort of winner here for the wide releases this last weekend. It did $15 million. I said it was going to do 14.2, so I was off less than $1 million in that one. Not too bad. The industry basically said something similar. It was all low to mid-teens essentially. Universal had that low to mid-teens as well. In terms of comparables that we talked about last week, it underperformed Medea Christmas, This Christmas, and The Best Man Holiday. So it was on the lower tier of those films. But I think, Universal's going to be happy with this. They got what they wanted out of it. I'm really interested to see what this will do in terms of legs and multiplier, because it's a holiday film or a Christmas film coming out in the middle of November. And maybe it's since I'm down in Tennessee and it's pretty warm, but it does not feel like the holidays at all right now. So let's see what it does next week. It might just stick around and just keep doing, low single $1 million, $8 million here this weekend, $7 million that next weekend. And just stick around to the end of the year. And that might happen, or it might just completely fizzle out. Who knows? Coming in at number 3 and sort of last on the wide release openers was the dumped film Shut In with Naomi Watts. Industry experts basically predicted something like this. Box Office Mojo said $2.5 to $3 million. IndieWire said low to mid single digits. Entertainment Weekly said 1 to 3. It came in at $3.6 million. I had predicted it at $4 million, so it was only about $400,000 off on this one. Not much to say about this one, just because, I mentioned before, this movie was produced by a company that doesn't do a lot of wide releases. It seemed like a complete afterthought. It reminded me of The Disappointment Room, Maybe a little bit like Lazarus Effect and the Blair Witch is a different story, but definitely the disappointment room is like, what is this movie? Did anybody market this movie? Is it coming out? Apparently it came out, but it did terrible. But Shut In was able to outperform that total mess of a movie. But it wasn't actually even close to Lazarus Effect, which is interesting because I felt like Lazarus Effect was a similar level of production in terms of horror film, just like super, super low budget, but they had a marketing arm behind it. If you have to market your product, like it doesn't, if you don't market it, nobody knows it exists. I know that's kind of like whatever, capitalism, but that's just the way it works. And I think with Shut In could have been a great film. It's not. But if they marketed it well, they could have easily got this up past $5 million. It shouldn't have been a problem to do that, but they just didn't put the money behind it. Cinema score on Shut In was a C, and that basically means it was failing completely. Although there has been a few actual Fs in cinema score history. I can't remember off the top of my head. I know the one is The Room. By Richard, not The Room, The Box by Richard Kelly, the director of Donnie Darko, which I actually saw 3/4 of that movie and I just stopped watching it because it was awful. I love that director. He also did Southland Tales. He made Donnie Darko. It was his first movie. And I think it's an absolute masterpiece of film. I really do. It's one of my favorite films of all time. A total cult hit. Came out to no fanfare in 2001. I believe it came out right after 9/11. And there was obviously there's a plane sort of crash engine involved. And they just basically they didn't ban the film. They just smothered the release. So no one even knew it was coming out. But it really gained a cult following. And I think it was just a wonderful film. Unfortunately, Richard Kelly has just never been able to recover. I think he got that F on cinema score for The Box, so I don't know if he's ever going to come back. In any event, that's a little Richard Kelly, Donnie Darko rant for you. Let's sort of talk briefly about what's coming out next week. The Edge of 17, that is with Woody Harrelson and the girl from Pitch Perfect 2, I forget her name. That's coming out on 1,800 screens next week from STX Entertainment. That is sort of a newer entertainment film company. It almost feels like a startup. I know it's backed by a lot of Chinese money, but they're buying sort of mid-grade films and putting them out there. I believe they bought this at I want to say Toronto, Sundance, something like that. The trailer looks great. It's a coming-of-age film. It's not going to do well at all. It's going to get absolutely buried by Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. This is the Harry Potter universe movie that is going to be huge. It's opening over 4,000 screens. I'm kind of treating it like not really a Harry Potter movie, but somewhere up on that echelon. I expect it to do well over $100 million in opening. Maybe that's crazy. I have to think about it more before I give an actual prediction, but I think it's going to do quite well. And then also opening this weekend is a movie that I didn't really know anything about, but it's called Bleed for This. It's a sports drama about boxing. This is from Open Road Films. Who knows what they're up to these days? They're that, it's a small kind of startup movie production company that is owned by AMC and Regal, I want to say, 2 theater chains. And apparently they were created to create VOD or direct to VOD films. And so I don't know what's going on with them. They're basically putting out these weird movies. They put out Max Steel a few weeks ago and it obviously bombed horrifically. This is going to bomb probably worse than that. I haven't seen a single ad for it. I had no idea it was coming out. It sounds like they just made these films or bought these films and are now just dumping them so they can put them on VOD. I don't really get the strategy. I don't know what's going on, but it is coming out next weekend, but no one's going to see it. In any event, those are the 3 big openers coming out next week, and Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk is going to expand wide this weekend as well. That's also sort of DOA. I just don't see where it's going. It's kind of that arty military film by Ang Lee, who's a wonderful director, but it just has no bite to it, no hype at all. In any event, I will be back later this week with the weekend prediction show to sort of put out some predictions on these new wide openers. Thanks for listening. This has been the Wildline Podcast. I've been Dan.